SEC game week is
Come on.
here. Georgia plays a real opponent in South Carolina. Real opponent? Is that a stretch? We'll talk about
Possibly.
that. But Georgia plays an SEC opponent at Sanford Stadium on Saturday. What have we seen out of the Gamecocks? What are we looking for this weekend? Our very early breakdown begins now on the Locked On Bulldogs podcast.
You are Locked On Bulldogs, your daily podcast on the Georgia Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Locked On Bulldogs, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Daniel and I are talking about, well, South Carolina and how bad they are, and are they an SEC team, and can we trust them to do those things? We're going to be talking about all of that and more. But first, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. More on them in a moment. Daniel, let's start with this. South Carolina is not great. That's a fair statement to begin the podcast with.
South Carolina blew out Furman over the weekend. Did give up a few points to Furman over the weekend, but we'll get to that maybe more in a bit. But I think everybody's really look at South Carolina was in one of the biggest games of the opening weekend, the Giant Tub of Mayonnaise Bowl, and South Carolina got run by North Carolina. Like, I don't think that's an exaggeration to say at all. Now, that being said, they were in that game in the second half. Like, they had chances. As much as North Carolina seemingly dominated that game, South Carolina had chances to win that game in the second half. North Carolina eventually pulls away at the end. But I think the way that it happened really is what was most shocking. And so this isn't the South Carolina team I think necessarily the Georgia fans thought that we were going to be going up against in the season. And I think that, to me, is the most interesting thing about this Gamecocks team. So I'm going to start there, if that's okay with you. To
Please.
me, if you were to ask me preseason, where do you exploit South Carolina? Where do you find weakness in South Carolina? I would have told you that the number one place that you go is to the quarterback. You go straight to Spencer Rattler because you throw some things at him that confuse him. You throw some things, you throw some defensive looks at him. You rattle him. You move him around. You collapse the pocket on him. He's going to give you the ball. He wants you to have the ball.
He's very bad at keeping it for himself.
This man is Will Levis-esque in the amount that he wants the other
He's a
team.
giver more than anything else.
He's just a generous spirit.
He
got
is.
a real generous spirit about him. That's what I would have said going into the season, that the weak link on this team, the thing that Kirby's going to try to exploit, is Spencer Rattler. Well, through 2 games, Clint, Spencer Rattler has been fantastic. He's been really good for South Carolina, and he's been really good in spite of the fact that the South Carolina offensive line has been maybe the worst in the entire country through 2 weeks. Like, that's the place now that you look at and you say, if Georgia's going to feast in this game, if Georgia's going to cover a very big number at home in this game, they're going to do it because, A, South Carolina is not going to be able to run the ball an inch against Georgia.
Nope.
Like, at all. And B, Spencer Rattler is going to be running for his life because big, angry defensive linemen are going to be coming on a jailbreak every single play through that offensive line. That's the area I think that you look at and say, South Carolina is completely outmatched. If anything, Spencer Rattler's been playing exceptionally well in spite of a terrible offensive line.
Let me give you some stats. Let me give you some numbers to back this up. 30 of 39. 76.9% against UNC. 353 yards. But Daniel sacked 8 times, 13 carries, negative 22 yards.
Sacked 8 times.
Holy jeez.
And this is not a stone-footed quarterback that just stands back there and takes sacks. All right? Like, this is he was sacked 8 times. He could have been sacked a dozen or more times in that game. I think he's playing well in spite of the poor offensive line. I actually think Spencer Rattler is a strength of this team. If I had to say anything about the South Carolina offense, it would be A, he doesn't have anybody to protect him, and B, he doesn't have anybody to throw to, Clint, because the best offensive weapon for South Carolina now plays for Florida State, just like most of the good players in the country apparently have transferred to Florida State. That's the thing that happened. And none of the players have transferred to Clemson. That's the way that the transfer portal works. So South Carolina has a weapon, I will say, at quarterback, but they don't have any means to use that weapon in their offensive game plan because they don't have receivers and they don't have an offensive line. And so they can't protect him with the run game and they can't protect him in the pass game. And he doesn't have great options to get the ball out quick and gain a bunch of yards after the catch. At least you would think, not against a defense the caliber of Georgia's.
No, not at all. It is going to be interesting because, again, it's the worst group. We did talk about this earlier on in the year. It's just a horrible, horrible, horrible group. Daniel, that offensive line has no talent, has no discipline, has no coaching. And I think Georgia's defensive line is going to run right over them in every single facet. And we're going to talk about the defensive side of the ball for South Carolina because it doesn't get better.
Does it? Well, what if I told you it got worse?
Oh, we're going to talk about that. But first, these. And Daniel, these are, in fact, game time. Game time right now. Daniel and I still looking for Kentucky tickets.
Yeah.
Still a thing. But we're not sweating.
Do you see a bunch of perspiration? And let me tell you, Clint sweats very easily. And so if it were even mildly concerning, this man would just be like the pilot in Airplane. Just absolutely.
They got that based on me. That character is written off of my physiological reaction to heat. So we're still looking, but we're not freaked out at all because game time. Game time's fantastic. Download the app, gametime.co. Place you're going to go, place you're going to get last minute tickets to any concert, any sporting venue, anything that you need to. They have price match. They are going to be low cost. It's going to be fantastic. And don't stress about anything because they got you covered, y'all. Game Time app or gametime.co. Use promo code LockedOnCollege for $20 off. That's promo code LockedOnCollege, $20 off. Get the app today and see how you don't have to stress like Daniel and I aren't stressing because you'll know that you have every access to the best way to get tickets. GameTime.co.
Talk to me about the South Carolina defense, Clint.
Yeah, it's bad. Like without competency of skill, without competency of coaching, scheme, or any distinguishable skill set that rises to the top. Sometimes you get pressure's a thing. We're gonna get pressure, or run stop, or fast, or athletic, or long, or lean. South Carolina has none of that. Their best player is still banged up from the opener. I don't think he's 100% right. And if he continues to have that injury, safety back there, it's going to be a problem. Daniel, they don't have dudes. Like, that's problem one. They don't have anybody to coach them or a recognizable identity that makes them into who they are. They gave up 21 points to Furman.
They gave up 21 points to Furman.
Let that sink in for a second.
Furman played 3 quarterbacks in this game. They gave up touchdowns to Furman's backup quarterbacks. That's the way that this game, passing touchdowns to Furman's backup quarterbacks. Furman didn't do anything particularly well in this game, but I'd say they threw the ball well enough. They had 250 yards through the air, all told, against South Carolina. Again, with 3 quarterbacks, they didn't run the ball, particularly well, but they did have, nearly 100 yards rushing, a little over 80 yards rushing in the game. But it's more so I want to look at North Carolina, because you would look at that week 1 score against North Carolina, 31-7. People coming into the season said, well, you held Drake May and this North Carolina offense to 31 points.
Fast forward a week, Daniel. Fast forward a week. What happened?
But so what happened is that North Carolina needed overtime at home to beat App State. And in regulation of that game, they only scored 33 points.
So what you're telling me is that they
are
on
App State was, and this is not your grandfather's App Sate team. Okay,
it is not. This is not the team that went to Michigan.
This ain't even the team that was made some noise in the Sun Belt over the last several years. App State's not that great of a team.
Belt.
Billy, how you doing, Billy?
Billy.
This is App State played North Carolina, you could argue, better defensively than South Carolina did. And so North Carolina, A, may not be very good, and B, North Carolina seemingly got quite a bit of whatever they wanted in that game against South Carolina. I just don't know if defensively South Carolina has any real difference makers like they do. It'll be interesting. We're going to have Andrew on the show tomorrow.
Yep.
And so we're going to be able to talk to him and, get his perspective and sort through some things. But that's one of the questions I'm going to be asking him is defensively, like, who are the guys that really South Carolina feels like these guys can go out and make plays for us? These are the reasons to be confident in this defense, because I don't know that you really feel like Georgia. It almost feels like Georgia, they don't need to lean one way or the other, because it's not like South Carolina has a deficiency against the run or a deficiency versus the pass.
That's right.
They're just seemingly a pretty vanilla, below average defense.
That's right.
Across the board. And when you combine that with a lack of skill talent and a lack of ability to score on the offensive side of the ball, there's not a ton of reason to be worried as a Georgia fan going into this game.
No, I think this is a nice little remedy, if I can, for some degradation of some names, Bobo being included in that. I think this is going to be a nice little remedy for it, because I think the balanced approach is going to be quite evident everywhere. I don't think there's going to be one area in which we are deficient, or which when we can't have our way, or get some film on what is good and how can we execute on it. I don't think that's going to be a problem in this game at all. As a matter of fact,
and I think there's some things that are going to help are Dejan Edwards is playing in this game.
Number one, that's huge.
That's massive. The implications of that cannot be overstated. Number two, the starters are going to get extended run in this game, right? Like, this is not the let's see how many people we can play parade is going to get pared way back this week.
Way down.
Do I think C.J. Allen's going to play and play quite a bit in this game? Yes, I do. But
that's not because he needs more time. It's because he's ready.
Do I think A.J. Harris is going to play quite a bit in this game? No, I don't. I don't think, at least not until things get way out of hand in the fourth quarter. And so I think you're going to see the starters get into a bit more of a rhythm, especially offensively. I think you're going to see the play calling find its groove, and I think a lot of that has to do with the best running back on the team being back. And Dejan Edwards is the best running back on this team.
He didn't misspeak.
Is he as good as some of the best running backs that have been on previous years' Georgia teams? No, he is not Nicholas Chubb, but he is the best running back on this team, and he will make a difference when he returns to the lineup this week.
He will change the complexity of what we look like.
It absolutely will. And I think you're exactly right, Clint. I think there's a bit of this going into this week that is going to just release a little bit of the pressure. Like just a valve that just gets turned ever so slightly in the Georgia fan base where everything kind of just like releases just a little bit, and people stop getting so skittish and edgy about woe is me, the sky is falling because we only scored 45 points back-to-back weeks.
We're going to talk more about this game, but first, these. And these are FanDuel. Daniel, to say that we need help.
I've moved on.
Okay.
I've moved on, Clint.
How about we move on to this? How about FanDuel.com/lockdown?
I'll just tell you this week, they're all going to cash. We're coming in hot, and the past is the past. We're like a shutdown corner, Clint. You get beat over the top for a touchdown. We got goldfish memory, and we have moved on. We are now, and we got beat over the top quite a bit.
But we're going to go over FanDuel.com/lockdown. We're going to make the parlays. We're going to make the straight ups. We're going to make all the bets that you can do as well with us. They're the official sportsbook of Locked On Podcast, Locked On Bulldogs. They're the place that Daniel and I go to so far lose money, but not this week. This week we're making money. It's going to happen. FanDuel.com/lockdown. Put $5 down on any bet. You get $100 in bonus bets right to you. $5 down any bet. You get $100. That's $100 in bonus bets straight to you. Come on, y'all. FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get over there right now. Best sports book in town. All right. We talked about the offense. We talked about the defense. We talked about Spencer Rattler. We talked about the historical evidence that suggests this should be no problem. So let's give a little sneak preview. I teased this somewhere else. The spread for this game is 24-27, depending on where you can get it at, which is a lot of points for an SEC game.
It's a fair number of points.
So Vegas tends to agree with you and I.
They do.
Okay.
They absolutely do. I think we're not giving locks here. We will give a lock on this game, or at least we'll make a prediction on this game on Thursday. We'll give a score prediction. Whether or not it's a lock will depend on how confident we feel about it. I will say this. I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning.
What'd you say?
If you're going to lay a big number with Georgia this weekend, if you think Georgia's going to come out here and steamroll, if you think Georgia's going to come out here and dominate, the only thing that I would caution you in doing so is that as much as South Carolina lacks weapons on the offensive side of the ball, as much as South Carolina lacks quality of players on the offensive line, as much as South Carolina lacks defensive identity of any kind, South Carolina has a difference maker at the most important position on the field.
At the place you want it most of all.
And I know that the rhetoric about Spencer Rattler is what I came into the season, propagating the same rhetoric, which is that he's wildly inconsistent. He's had a few good games. He played good against Clemson. He played good against Tennessee. Yes, he's had a few good games. Let me just say this to you, Clint.
Okay.
What did that Tennessee and Clemson game have in common? They were at what point in the season were those early season games, or were those games right in the middle of the season last year? When did they play those South Carolina, those Clemson and Tennessee games? They played them right at the end of the schedule. Right at the end of the schedule, when Marcus Satterfield, the former offensive coordinator at South Carolina, decided he was going to strip back a lot of the offensive fluff and nonsense that he had tried to put in this offense and just let Spencer Rattler go out there and cook. Meanwhile, Spence Rattler, by the way, plays his best games of the season in the last 3 games of the season right after that happens. Meanwhile, this offseason, Marcus Satterfield is now out as the offensive coordinator. He moves on to Nebraska. Let me ask you real quick, Clint. How's that going for Marcus Satterfield over at Nebraska as the offensive coordinator? Is Marcus Satterfield good at being offensive coordinator? Is he a brilliant offensive mind?
No, it's not great at all. It's
not
quite
going
putrid.
Good.
No, it's
They
bad.
bring in Dowell Loggins, the new offensive coordinator, a tight ends coach from Arkansas, not a flashy hire, not a show-stopping, newsworthy hire. But the way that Spencer Rattler is playing, the simplicity of the offense and the way that they're letting him play is a testament to Spencer Rattler has had at South Carolina maybe one of the worst Power 5 offensive coordinators in football. That's the point I'm trying to make. Marcus Satterfield is awful.
Yeah.
Since he has either been relieved of his duties or been replaced entirely, Spencer Rattler has come alive and has been playing like a totally different quarterback. I think this Spencer Rattler that's playing this year is a different player than we've seen in years past. It's a different player than was playing against Georgia early in the season last year. And so if you're going to lay a big number, all that to say, I don't necessarily want to talk you out of that because I might agree with you. But if you're going to lay a big number, the only thing I would caution you about is they do have a guy at quarterback who can just come out there and take a game over if he needs to.
Right.
We've seen him do it before.
And I think we will see competency. Now, whether he will have time to do so, that's going to be the question, right? That is going to be, if he's going to be able to produce with the short amount of time that he has is clearly the only thing that we really need to gauge and predict. Because if that doesn't happen, then nothing gets on track, and doesn't matter what you call, it doesn't matter what you predict, it doesn't matter what you game plan, it can't happen. So that's mine. On the defensive side, we're going to be just fine. There's nothing that scares me on that side. And for them, Daniel, I just don't see them having the dudes again to compete with any of the dudes we get. And we get a couple guys back. Maybe Ladd McConkey comes back as well, and maybe he makes an impact. Who knows? We're going to see it come game time. Which reminds me, get over to the subtext. Let us know you're there, so we can interact. We can talk to you, and we can let you know what we're hearing. Would be a fantastic thing.
Yeah.
This has been Locked On Bulldogs, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and we'll see you guys all week long leading up to Saturday game time. We will see you guys then.
See ya.